Doug Pagitt Radio calling Ani. So thanks.
Hello.
Hey, Ani, this is Doug Pagitt.
Hi, Doug.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Oh, we're so glad to have you on the radio show.
Oh, likewise. Thanks for asking.
Oh, just thrilled about it. So, Ani, I'm going to tell people a little bit about you, and then I'd like you to tell people about you because
And then
I like you.
correct the things
Yeah.
that he got wrong.
Ani, you're joined here. John Music is in the studio with me. He's the engineer and sidekick on the radio show here. So, Ani Ani, you do a number of things in your life, don't you? You are a musician and a songwriter and an author and an activist and someone who's creating communities, and all of that happening inside the paradigm of trying to think about what a Muslim experience and what Islam would look like inside of an American context.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's, I would say, progressive Islam context.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that, because I think for a lot of people, as we were chatting the other day, as you and I were talking the other day, I know a lot of people, their experience with Islam is either in sort of a academic way, like they've studied it or they've heard news stories or so on, or their experience is through a particular cultural expression. So here in the United States, there's the largest population of Somalians outside of Somalia. And so many of the interactions here in the Twin Cities that we would have with Muslims would happen inside of a Somalian context. And for other people who live in other parts of the United States, their experience with Muslims would be inside of a Muslim context. So, when you try to describe a progressive Muslim context, tell us a little bit about what that means.
So, to bounce off what you were describing as like in the Somali context, so the tendency of Islam in America is that of a cultural practice from whichever home country they come from, whether it be Persian, Somali, Ethiopian, Pakistani, and so on and so forth. And the language at these mosques tend to be that of that national language. So what we are creating is an American Islam in its identity, in that the sermons are in English and our prayers are a hybrid of Arabic and English. And so, and what is emphasized more are the values of Islam, which we as progressive, we define Islam as inherently progressive, rather than the rigid and orthodoxy that you see in many practices, interpretations of Islam. So our Islam highlights the values that we find, which is egalitarian, believe it or not, and the values of equality, the values of love, compassion, interfaith, inclusivity, non-discriminating Islam. And so those are the qualities that we find in the Quran, and doing good deeds, caring for your brothers and sisters, no matter what race, ethnic, religion they are, all those good values, those progressive values. And so we highlight those values as part of the fabric of the way we practice Islam, rather than the cultural interpretations that people come to the table with. And so that's what makes us different in how we practice Islam at our mosques, our local mosques.
Yeah, and I personally find that so exciting. It's so close to some of the things of the work that I do, and some of the work that I've done with partners in the Jewish communities, of trying to recognize and sometimes sort of even tease out what is the religious expression of our communities, and what is the culture that gave rise to that religious expression. And so in Christianity, it finds itself rooted so often in 15th and 16th century Europe, right, with a whole worldview and concept and a set of assumptions and socio-political expectations and all that. And so religion looks and feels in the United States, Christianity looks and feels in the United States sometimes like middle centuries Europe, the church architecture and the clothes that the clergy wear and the words that we have for these activities. And so a lot of us have been pushing really hard to say, look, the way you're a faithful Christian, and I would say, embedded in the Christian narrative, is that Christianity is alivened in every culture where people are a part of that faith. And so what they should do is give rise to an expression of that faith that lives as well in that context as it has in any others. And that sounds to me an awful lot like the kind of work that you're doing inside of the Muslim context.
Yeah. You know, at the end of the day, what we're finding is that the numbers don't lie, and that is, there's probably like about 25 to 28% of Muslims that only that attend mosque. So you have a substantial Muslim population that are disenfranchised or disengaged from the traditional mosque, or doing their own thing, or have left the faith for that matter. So we feel that there is a great potential for what we do down the road. Say 20 years from now, we will probably become the norm, or we will probably become more of a player. I mean, we just started 6 years ago. So, but the vision is, at the end of the day, you have the second, third, fourth generation American Muslims, and even the converts that convert to Islam. They convert to Islam because of what they read in the Quran, and they fall in love with it, and they convert, and then they go to the mosque, and then they're like, "What the hell?"
Yeah,
that's what I converted into. You know, it's
that's the story of many Christians as well.
Right.
You know, so then they're like, "Well, what do I do?" You know, this is, you know, I believe in this faith, but you know, having to change my name, women in the back, the role of lack of role of women in any say in religious matters, that really doesn't sit well with many Muslim Americans, including those of us who are born and raised in Islam. And unfortunately for us, you know, being in America, you have the luxury of reading all these books that in many Muslim countries are banned, and so therefore you have no way of reading a more enlightened and a more pragmatic interpretation of Islam, because you know, you would probably get killed off, or you would be banned, or what have you. I mean, I'm not saying this, you know, pulling this out of thin air. I mean, I know this because when you speak against the tyranny of Sharia law in Sudan, you're executed. Period. You know,
right.
and we have examples of that, and that's just a recent historical example. But so, you know, so here in America we have that luxury. Now, if I'm going to look up more pragmatic interpretation, scholarly writing about Islam, I'm not going to go to a Muslim website. I will be going to Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all these, you know, university sites to buy those books, because the Muslim websites here in America will not sell them, just as they will not also sell music by a female artist or a woman singing, God forbid.
Yeah, because I do want to talk about that a bit, because with some of the work that you've done, you've tried to release not just theology and not just cultural explanation, but also new practices, and especially new practices through music. And so in a little bit, I do want to ask you about that, because the album that you put together is just beautiful and seems really interesting. You know, inside the Christian context, I know there's a lot of pressure, because people don't recognize, practitioners of Christianity don't always recognize when their expression of their faith is a cultural thing as opposed to a demand of their religious commitment, right? So they think, and they've been told that, well, we do this because this is what the faithful have always done through all time, and we're staying inside of some kind of orthodoxy. And then someone comes along like me or someone else and says, well, actually, you know, that's rooted in a particular cultural circumstance. And then there's this pressure that we hear a lot. And I'm wondering if you have the same thing in your context, where people say, well, you're just trying to change Christianity so that it will be more attractive to people who don't like it. Why do you keep wanting to give our faith away to people who don't appreciate it? Do you experience that same thing?
Yeah. We're selling out. We are West. We are pleasing the West. We are totally reinventing the faith. But the truth of the matter is, everything we do is from the framework of the Quran and some tradition. So it depends. So you have some tradition that are misogynistic, then obviously that contradicts what the Quran is saying. But some of the tradition, for example, in Africa or even in Asia, traditionally women have always, or even in the Caucasus, where they are really old, or in China where they are really old communities, where women have played very strong and major roles in tradition, or even at the inception of Islam, when you have Prophet Muhammad's wife, who, if it wasn't for her financial backing, it was her finances that really helped the community survive, because they were, at some point when they started to grow, they were banned from trading and or supporting themselves through work with the larger society, and so because of the ostracization, the finances of Prophet Muhammad's wife was the one really helped sustain the community. So so we've always had women, powerful women, and the role of women in communities, and so we have that tradition. So that's the tradition we go back to, rather than the tradition in Saudi Arabia, just to name, or in Taliban, in Afghanistan or Pakistan, where the misogyny is so severe, where women don't even have the basic rights. And for us as Muslims, it is really infuriating that what goes on in Saudi Arabia, for example, is looked upon as what Islam, the definition of Islam, just simply because Mecca is placed there.
Well, yeah, and that's I was going to ask you about that, because as a someone who tries to pay attention to issues of religion and to Islam in the United States, I'll tell you that I even kind of hear sometimes and sense and don't know the difference between, like, is Islam actually different in different parts of the world, or like in Egypt, where you have a more secular society and Islam looks and feels different? Is that because they've
everywhere?
Yeah,
that's the thing. The only uniformity there is the way we pray. And even then, depending on what sect you are, there are some slight changes. But for the most part, a lot of the prayers are all the same. And it's in Arabic. And but as far as interpretation and how that meshes up with your traditional, I know that the Islam in Malaysia and the Islam in China, the Islam in Indonesia is very different. Well, and in Malaysia in particular, it used to be very different, but now with the Arabization and with the influence of Saudi money in all Muslim countries, or non-Muslim countries even, Islam has become really more, it has become more Saudi. It has become more Wahhabi, which is not very pretty. And I don't mean that I mean it in a very negative tone. So, where, in Malaysia, where women are the person at the market that does negotiating, the head of the household, or in Malaysia, our equivalent of the Malaysian equivalent of Bernanke, is a woman. And so we have many women in politics and business. So women have always played a strong role, but this influence of Wahhabism is really encroaching on a lot of women's rights in marriage. And because in Malaysia, when you are as a Muslim, you fall under Sharia law. If you're a non-Muslim, you fall under civil law. So, whether you like it or not, you will fall under Sharia law. And every other year when I go back to Malaysia, the Sharia law changes. So Sharia law also is dependent on the country that you are from, because the Sharia law in Morocco is different from Saudi, it's different from Malaysia, and Pakistan and Afghanistan. So,
that's fascinating.
So when they say here Sharia law,
right? Okay,
and so which Sharia law? And what is Sharia law?
You should make that more clear, because people are trying to pass laws, to make sure that the United States doesn't fall under Sharia law. So you should make it clear that there's many of them. So we should have lots of laws for that.
For me, for me personally, I am completely against it, and so I'm not in defense of Sharia law.
Yeah,
I think it should just be the law of the land, the Constitution, and whatever your state laws are. I think using Sharia law for marriage and for divorce and for division property and especially in how it's being used and abused in the Muslim community is unacceptable. And so we are completely against. We are not in support of Sharia law. That's for sure.
Is there a lot of animosity between like the different viewpoints of Islam, that to where like perhaps some that are more conservative, do they look at, like, let's say, Malaysia, as, oh, those people, they have a watered down Muslim faith? Is there, do they look at others as being less or corrupt because they're not as strict or following the same things that they do?
Yeah, well, Malaysia is a bit of an exception because Malaysia has become an economic power for a Muslim country. We are really advanced, and so because of that. When they came as slaves here to America, so the fact that when they came into an Islam that was alien to them, what they should have come, and I wish what they did was went and visited back the Islam that they left in Africa, that was musical, and that was more egalitarian in its practice, that was more Sufi. But instead, what they did was they basically adopted first, the Nation of Islam, which was very, and I understand the context because they needed to empower themselves, and so, race was used as a form of mobilizing and within the religious context, and so I actually went to see a Louis Farrakhan lecture when I first came to the United States when I was 18. As I was like, okay, this is a Muslim community, and I was quite shocked what I saw and what I heard. And then you have Malcolm X, and then so many switched over to Sunni Islam. So you have these different versions of Islam that the African Americans adopted, and how I wish that instead of adopting these, made up and then Arab version of Islam, the really still segregating men and women, and so very traditional. Yeah. I wish they would have went back to their roots, which was, their African Muslim tradition, which is not Arab, African Muslim tradition, which is very different.
So it's
And
interesting
that
because what
is,
I had heard, sort of in people explaining to me why Islam tends to look so similar, so culturally similar, was that within Islam you don't have the freedom for these kinds of cultural interpretations and cultural indigenous expressions.
yeah,
But
that's not
that's just
true.
not true, is it?
No, it's not.
What what
If
other
you
things
see,
about Islam do I believe that aren't true? Do you think? Do you think there's other
well,
things too, or is that the only one?
well, the thing is, the thing is, it's so, every, okay, so there's a Sufi sheikh, in one of the states in Russia that was just executed,
Yes,
24
right.
hours ago with a, suicide bomb by a woman. And,
Uh huh.
so they have their version of Islam. Islam
Huh.
has this way of just being accepted into people's
Huh.
spirituality. I mean, you have Sufis in America, right?
Yeah.
They are Sufis, but they don't identify themselves as Muslim. I'm
Yeah.
like, how's that possible? Because it is Islam. And so it's really interesting, but that's a different conversation. But
So what has made
but
it so hard for there to be an American expression? Like why after, in the last 100 years has there not been something more akin to the kinds of work that you're doing now? Like what's the holdup? Why is it? Because American culture is so powerful, right? Yeah, sort of as a
yeah.
force around the world, and people adopt American culture around the world. Why is Islam? Why does it seem to be so insulated from that effect with practicing Muslims or desirous practicing Muslims in the United States?
I think there is. I think as immigrants to the United States, I think there is that. There's that security blanket of being practicing the Islam as you've been raised in. So
Yeah.
and people cling to that cultural heritage. I see that. I know I do weddings. I officiate weddings, and so interfaith weddings in particular. Especially Muslim women who are marrying non-Muslim men, because there really are very few, only MPV, and we have other officiants in our organization that conduct those services, and also same-sex marriage. But we see that cultural. There's some beautiful things about cultural traditions. The ethnic costumes and things like that.
Sure.
But what we're saying is that that's all pretty, but let's really. I think we're just not afraid, and I'll say that we're definitely not afraid to challenge the status quo. We are very secure in our beliefs, and I think that comes with time. I think when you're a new immigrant, although I am a new immigrant, but like 4 generations, the immigrants that came here, I think it's just easy just to follow along, even if you don't really subscribe to a lot of the values anymore. And so again, so that's why a lot of Muslims don't even attend mosque.
Well, you have written that in the spirit of doing your part in creating this kind of new American Islam tradition, you've completed a collection of songs that borrow from classical choral tradition, but with Islamic lyrical content. The music is Western in musical scale, and the singing is more like church choirs than the Qawwalis or the Nasids. Am I saying that word?
Nasheed, yeah.
Nasids? I don't even know what that is. The lyrics are translated of the Prophet Muhammad's favorite prayer, the prayer of light. And so you've approached creating an American tradition of Islam and knowing that it's important to have songs to sing. Talk a little bit about that, just sort of your understanding as a community organizer and activist about how important it is to have music that helps to set the cultural tone.
Yeah, so in the rest of the Muslim world, there's singing. Although not in the mosque, but there are always religious songs, whether male or female singing it, right? But lo and behold, in America, we have no such thing because we have the American mosque and communities have adopted a more a very conservative Islam, which bans music, and you can only have singing if they are male, and with
Really?
no other, with very limited musical accompaniment. Now,
And what's that rooted in? Is that rooted in the sort of sensuality that music can create, and there's a fear of that, or how is that explained?
yeah. So it's a sexualization of everything, right?
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah.
go figure.
Yeah, right.
So, but the one
You
thing
mean
that
sex is messing up religion again in some way? Yeah.
sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But so the thing is that so music is so spiritual.
Mhm.
So here we have in Islam, we do Quranic recitation. It
Hmm.
is so powerful because you're singing it. If you're reading it, it just falls flat. But if you are reciting the Quran in Arabic and we call it recitation,
Yeah.
but it's really singing because I can play those notes on the keyboard. So don't tell me it's not singing.
Oh.
So so if you can cry listening to that, just imagine how powerful music is, because it is really a very spiritual emotion that is being clipped off and it's just cutting a part of your spirituality when you are not allowed to use music, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
and many of our community members feel the same, and so why don't we develop our own? And I became an activist because of music, because after 9/11, I put a Islamic pop CD, and I was, not to brag or anything, but I was really the first female pop artist, Islamic pop artist,
That's
right?
awesome.
And,
Yeah.
and I thought the Muslim community was going to embrace it, but instead, for the most part, the CD was banned. Nobody would touch it with a 10-foot pole because I used all the instrumentation, the guitars, the bass. It was a pop production.
Sure. Yeah.
But most importantly, because I was a female singer, and so my voice is apparently sexual and is arousing as a woman, not me as Ani, but as a woman in general.
Yeah.
And I said, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
I'm born and raised a Muslim. I've never heard this interpretation of Islam before. I come from a Muslim country, and etc. And so I started really looking this up and studying it, and then I find that there's this whole slew of other issues within the Muslim community that I was clueless about. And so that's how I really became an activist, and through the arts. And so now I'm just going back full circle, after 6 years of community building, coming and feeling secure enough. Okay, now let's insert music into our services. So so this music that I've created is basically an expression of going to when you go to a church, you have these beautiful church choirs, and it's so moving, and you feel it, you feel the spirituality. And so at our recent Eid prayer, I performed the songs, and some of our community members know the songs and they sang along, and many of the comments that I got back was that this was really, it was just really beautiful, and it was just powerful. And it just took something that was just that was an Eid prayer, which is special in itself, but with the music inserted after that really was a home run.
Yeah, that's great.
And
so Ani, do you lead a mosque, or do you lead a community, or what? Like what do you call the group of people that you meet together with?
I call it our community. I don't call it our congregation. I call it our community because, and it's really important to have a community, because if I'm going to do it and I'm going to go to a mosque, say, here's my songs, I want you to perform it. It doesn't work that way. It has to be really organic. It really has to come from the bottom up, from the bottom. It has to be because the community wants and yearns it.
Yeah.
When you doing it differently. Doing it differently would be tyrannical. Would be me dictating what the community wants, and that doesn't not work.
So are you considered an imam in your community?
Yeah. Well, I don't like to be called an imam.
Yeah.
I don't feel, an imam is someone who leads prayer.
Yeah.
And I've led prayer, but that's as far as my imamness goes. I don't want to go any further than that.
Imanity.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
I don't aspire to be one, as in like Imam Dai and really
Sure.
qualified people.
But when people like think of like religious leaders, they think of like a pastor
I
and
know,
a priest
but
and a
that's
rabbi
the
and an
Christian
imam.
thing, that's the Christian and the Jewish thing, and we're kind of like
I know.
stuck with that your definition of it. I was like, I was like, do I have to be imam for you to talk to me?
No,
it's like,
no, it's just you don't have to be, but it'd be really cool if you were.
Doug, but in the faith settings.
I know,
like,
because people want to go for that
terrible.
power, don't they? Like I don't use pastor as a self-defining term, and we call our church a community rather than a church. So I do the same thing for very similar reasons, and and when I go to meetings or whatever, right, and it just reflects the reality so much more than this other thing. But I agree with you. I go to meetings and people there's like this posturing within conversations of religious traditions where they want to know if like you're the person that's got the power and the mojo. Like, well, are you just like a community member, or are you somebody that runs this place? So you end up playing by those rules, and I know it just
Well, yeah, I mean, like as a community organizer, someone that that have been running the organization from day one, day-to-day management of the organization. So by default, I am sort of the spokesperson. Yeah. And so I am the spokesperson as the chair of the board and as the president. So. But the thing that this imam word has cropped up several times more is because when I officiate the weddings, and I do the Islamic wedding, not just the secular wedding, but I do the Islamic wedding. There's a whole process to it, and I recite the Quran and so on and so forth. So it automatically makes you an imam because in the context of Islam. Culturally anyway, you're supposed to be wedded by an imam, So
are we okay to refer to you as our imam? Me and John, can you be our imam? If we need an imam.
No, please do not call me.
We need to call.
Oh, come on!
All right, so that's Ani. Ani, I love what you're doing, and so appreciate your spirit and all that you're about. And the website that you're connected to is the one for the Muslims for Progressive Values. So it's mpvusa.org, and we're gonna go into the break with one of the songs from your album.
Oh, cool!
And it's let me see which one it is that we're going to do. It is the Prayer of Light, and there's a great little YouTube thing of it too, which has the lyrics to it. And so, is there anything you want to tell us about this this particular song and why you put it together and why it's on the album and so on?
Yeah, it's one of the songs that is actually it's a very popular prayer in the Muslim community worldwide, and they know it in their own languages. And so this is a prayer that we actually we're just reciting it after the traditional ritualistic prayer. But then I decided to take that and put it into a song format because it just fit in really nicely. And it really ended up being a very magical song, and it's one of those. It's one of those songs that after I was done writing, it was like, oh God, this is so what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
It's really great. One of those moments where someone's telling you, hey, this is what you're sent for, So. And the other songs just came together really easily, and it was actually a very different way for me to write because usually I do the tracks, I do the production, and then I start thinking about the lyrics. Yeah. But in this sense, what I did was I just stared at the lyrics, and I just let my finger run over the keyboards and let the lyrics dictate the chord changes and the melody that I wanted to those words wanted me to emphasize and emote, So that was the writing process, and I actually sang the song at a friend's deathbed a few weeks ago. I went to visit him, and I was holding his hand and just listening to his breath, and very labored breath, and I just sang the song, and it was it just seemed like the right song for that. And because of the words, So. Yeah.
Well, Ani, we're going to listen to it, and thanks so much. And we'd love to have you on the show on a regular basis if you're open to that.
Oh, absolutely, anytime, Doug.
Great. All right, dear. Thanks so much. We'll talk with you soon.
All right, take care.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye-bye.
Bye.
So here's Ani. The song is called "A Prayer of Light," and we'll listen to it for a moment.
Oh Allah, grant me light in my heart, light in my grave, light in front of me, light behind